Well, guys, we are back for another episode of the Liberal Asshole Show, episode 40. So, what are today's topics?
Russo-Ukraine War update. Did NATO really betray Russia? America's starving Afghanistan. Biden doing student debt relief. Turtle Mitch wants to starve kids. Andrew Cuomo wants to simp. And 2022 Mlb Lockout.
Alright, so of course, as long as the Russo-Ukraine War is going on, I think we need to do this every single week just to keep everyone up to date. So I just load up Wikipedia right now. Let me go get the map too, because they did a massive rehaul on the Wikipedia article, if you've noticed. And here is the updated map. Doesn't look that much different from last week either.
No.
Although I find a little weird.
Highways taken around near Kyiv, and I think a couple of areas. One or two areas. Hang on, I'm taking a look here.
What I find very weird and stupid is, don't you notice, like, especially to the north, where they're doing like a lot of snaking around. All it takes is one attack in the rear to cut that off and encircle them. So not very smart of them to do that.
Yeah, they're trying the encirclement strategy with Kyiv at the moment.
But at the same time, they're risking them getting encircled themselves. So stupid. But anyways, as in terms of the death figures right now, Russia, as we said last time, it has not changed. They say 498 troops were killed, almost 1,600 were wounded. According to Western officials, 5,800 were killed. According to America, 3,500 to 6,000 were killed. According to Ukraine, it's up to 12,000 casualties, but that doesn't mean deaths either. That can mean just injuries too. In terms of, and then of course of Ukraine, their deaths haven't changed. It's 110 soldiers killed. America says they've lost 2,000 to 4,000. Russia says they've killed almost 3,000, wounded almost 4,000, captured almost 600. So their death totals largely still have not changed officially. But on the one hand, Ukraine says they've lost. But like I said before, Russia says they've lost 400 on the low end to high end 12,000. Ukraine, it's low end 100 to high end a couple thousand. Now, as I said before, don't ever take these numbers official until the war's over. You know both sides are lying in that regard.
Oh yeah, the first casualty of war is the truth.
And what was the what was it that I wanted to talk about? There was something. Oh yeah, they've been doing like. So, oh, now I remember. Russia a few days ago, if you heard, they actually offered a agreement, I guess you could say, that they would agree to end the war, if you ever heard that. So, yeah. I remember them. There was 4 things. 1, Ukraine would have to stop fighting. 2, they would have to have like an agreement or constitutional amendment or whatever that they're not allowed to join NATO and stay neutral, because for all of you who don't know, it is in their constitution for the last several years that they're trying to join NATO. In their constitution too, believe it or not. Free.
What happened with Crimea occupied?
Free. Crimea. I mean, they have to recognize Crimea belonging to Russia, and 4, they would have to recognize the 2 breakaway regions in Donbass as independent. Now, a bunch of this stuff was already de facto, so I don't know why they would really be doing the status quo. With the neutrality, the NATO, the Crimea and Donbass things. The only thing that's interesting to know is stop fighting, which you can't really trust them in that regard. But I also have to say this because it seems they might have softened up the languages too of the deal, meaning of their offer. Because remember, it was they were going to denazify the government. That wasn't on the list.
No, and it doesn't seem the government to install a Russian puppet while still allowing their Nazi and Islamist battalions to continue fighting.
And it doesn't seem to be anything about like taking any more territory or anything like that. So I'm sure Ukraine probably won't accept this, and the war would still going on. But Ukraine, I'm gonna say this right now: if you're watching, any of you in Ukraine watching, I think you probably should at least consider maybe this offer, because in the end, I still don't think that you're gonna win this war. Do you still think they're gonna win?
And once you guys fall, Russia's gonna rampage into Moldova. Moldova doesn't stand a chance. They'll fall within a week.
or even sooner, since they're so small and have no army. But
Yeah, they just walked there. But remember that once they've taken Moldova and annexed Belarus, they really can't go any further in Europe because they go east, go west, they run into Poland, NATO, go north, Baltic states, NATO, go south, Romania, NATO.
but 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 you really should think about, because I still don't think you're gonna win this war in the end. And it's possible you might have done enough pain to Russia that they might have softened up the terms. So, because this is something I do like in Vicky 2 and EU4, where I go to war, I offered a peace deal sooner, hoping that I beat them so bad that they'll just give up. But of course, if they don't give up, then I'll keep invading them, and then I'll add more onto the list for all the pain I had to go through. So I want you to really think about this. If you
the
don't...
other thing is, though, is that also once they take Moldova, Russia's going to turn on Georgia.
Well, of course, we're talking about Ukraine at the moment.
Yeah, I know.
But Ukraine, like I'm saying, if you don't maybe consider this, I think they're going to still beat you in the end. So if you keep fighting, they might demand more from you. Whereas right now, you might have a possible way out of it. So really, 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 really think about this and maybe possibly consider it. Because it largely is like the status quo. Russia's had Crimea since 2014.
They've had Donbass, big chunks of Donbass since similar time frames.
Yeah. You weren't going to join NATO. You largely were neutral in that regard. So, it's largely like status quo. So, it's something that you should at least give a think about to save yourselves and to end this war. So,
I'd also give, say with Russia, that once these changes are made, get out of the Ukraine.
Yeah.
And the rest of their border.
So, yeah, what do you got to say about this so far? Any change in some last week? What do you think?
Yeah. I would say strongly consider it. I reckon this is the best that they're going to get. Plus, it also help protect Moldova and Georgia, because if they do take Ukraine, like I said, they'll turn on Moldova and Georgia, go and use the same strategy.
Although Georgia, they're already on their border, so nothing would really stop them. But
yeah, like I said, true. They might move on Georgia then.
So, but do you still think that Russia's going to end up winning regardless? Still, like I do.
Eventually they're going to circle Kyiv, and so eventually they'll encircle Kyiv. That's just going to happen at some point, and then that'll be close to it. So I know that the government will probably try to move, set up another government further east and just keep fighting.
West.
I think west. I mean, yeah, west. Getting east and west confused in that area.
And of course, Russia's like economy's pretty much like dying really badly. If you've seen like the last week or so, I actually saw a report that they might actually go default soon.
Oh shit!
Which is another reason why they probably offered the terms more like maybe generous to Ukraine, so they could probably end the war as quickly as possible. Which is another strategy too. I have to do in EU4 and Vicky 2 a lot. If the economy's really dying, I have to like end the war as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So just keep fighting back Ukraine and try and get as good of a deal as possible and get out of it as soon as possible, so we don't have to worry about like World War III anytime soon. And hopefully, there's another thing too, because I remember I talked about last time about the Iran nuclear deal, about it being possibly brought back, and we were going to talk about when it does or anything. Well, now the talks are on hold now, if you didn't hear about that. And you know why?
Why?
Not even America this time. It's Russia. Because Russia's because right now, I guess I'll talk about right now, the deal was largely almost set. Like there was like one thing Iran wanted left for finally like accept it. They wanted like a guaranteed assurance that America would not leave it again. Now, unfortunately, in order to do that, America would have to like ratify through Congress, and unfortunately, that's not a guaranteed thing to do whatsoever. Like, I think you need like up to 2/3, and none of the Republicans are going to support. Hell, not even the Democrats are going to be fully on board with it, which is ridiculous.
No. I'll tell you now that you're going to have to steal 19 Republicans to get it through the Senate, because Manchin and Sinema are going. Well, what am I saying? No, because Manchin and Sinema are Republicans with D's next to their names, so you just have to. Yeah, you still have to steal 19 other Republicans, because you got 52 Republicans that'll vote against it initially.
Yep, and then you got to deal with Congress too. So unfortunately, America cannot guarantee that.
Yeah, you might be able to get it through with the reps. Just pull enough of the more war-weary Republicans, if you can get just barely enough of them to pull it through.
So yeah, that was the current situation. Now, the last few days, Russia's add on that they want America to not like sanction them if they like do trade with Iran like it was normally before with the Iran deal. And Iran now actually like criticize them for like trying to sabotage the deal now. So unfortunately now it's on hold right now, so who knows if anything will happen to that. And hey, at least this time we don't have to blame America for that one. But of course, at the same time, it is our fault too for leaving in the first place. And this stupid negotiations was so stupid, we should just got right back in, end the discussion. Instead of doing this long-ass negotiation that now we have to worry about someone else fucking it up now.
Yep.
And of course, have you noticed a whole bunch of other things happen because everyone's too distracted with the war now? Now North Korea is launching a whole bunch of missiles, doing tests and all that. And like, no one's paying attention to it, which, hey, perfect time to do so, and everyone's busy and all that crap.
Yep. I remember also China flew some planes over some military planes over Taiwan as well.
Well, for all of you who don't know, that's actually very common. To it's like a common day occurrence, just like America and NATO do that to Russia too, and Russia does it right back to them. And supposedly, I found out, Taiwan's like area of airspace where they watch this stuff also goes over mainland China. If you don't know that. So every time China flies their planes in their territory, their radar goes off. It's like a triangle starting in Taiwan, goes deep into China's like coastline. And speaking of which, you gotta wonder, since you just brought it up, do you think what's happened to Russia right now with the Ukraine war, with how bad it's going and how economically fucked they're getting, do you think maybe they'll scare China into not attacking Taiwan? And also don't forget too how they're like trying to both sides everyone, too, remember?
Hold on, let me check something.
Because like I said before, we need to make it clear to China, if you try the same thing to Taiwan, you're going to experience the exact same pain Russia's going to get. So, don't try it. So, I don't know if there's anything left. I don't know if there's anything... What?
I'm trying to think here. What is... Ukraine and Taiwan's militaries are about the same size. Taiwan's got, I think, about half the population.
Yeah, they got like 20, 30 million.
Yeah, their population's similar to Australia's.
But one thing that's in their favor too. One thing in their favor too is they're ocean, so they have to do an amphibious invasion, and they're almost entirely mountainous like Japan, so they're gonna be like booby trapped like Switzerland.
I don't think. Yeah, I think it might be that final point that China's like, right, we'll militarily back off from Taiwan and we'll just do the try a
Belt and Road. And stuff
probably
like
try a Belt and Road or
And speaking of which,
the diplomatic reintegration.
Yeah, speaking of which, I'm gonna look it up really quickly. Okay, no, for a minute I thought Taiwan was part of it, but they're not. So yeah, what do you guys say about this so far? Do you think anything gonna get better anytime soon?
I don't know. I could see Ukraine being like, you know what? We'll take them. We'll remove that thing out of that part out of I think the other thing is Belarus as well. Yeah, that Russia would have to. That Putin would be like, right, Lukashenko, we're pulling out of Ukraine. They've done made the adjustments we want them to do, and we're gonna pull out, and that includes you. All right.
All right, so hopefully shit will get resolved. But until there's some sort of peace agreement said, we're gonna keep covering this on every single episode because it's that important. All right, so next on the list is watching a video from Alternate History Hub. Yay! Gonna watch a video from Cody. Have you ever heard of Alternate History Hub?
Yes, I have.
Cody is an awesome alternate historian YouTuber that I've been watching since he started. It's all the way back in 2013. He does like a whole bunch of really cool alternate history videos. He actually did a video recently because of the invasion. Did NATO really betray Russia? I thought it was gonna be at first like an alternate history because it's not. That's what he was gonna do at first, like an alternate history of if Russia did join NATO. But then he changed it to this one, and he goes pretty deep into it about what happened after the Soviet Union collapsed. So now we're gonna watch it.
Wondering, how did it come to this? How, even after the USSR fell, did Russia go down such a different path than NATO? Was there ever perhaps some possibility that these two rivals after the end of the Cold War would have came together in peace? Because apparently Putin seems to think so, or at least he says so. His current track record with the truth isn't the best, by the way.
You really think someone would do that?
Putin says Russia wanted to join NATO, but NATO didn't let them. Is there truth to this?
And if you didn't know, when Clinton visited Russia in 2000, when Putin became president, he actually did suggest that Russia join NATO. If you didn't know about that, and not only that, the Soviet Union also suggested back in the 1950s to join NATO. So it's
it's an alternate history thing I saw. Man, I don't know if it was from this guy or not. But actually said that after Stalin had died,
Beria tried to do it.
Their version that Russia might have joined NATO.
Yeah, and I think he's actually going to talk about them joining NATO a little bit later on.
The answer to why Russia didn't join NATO is a story about a former superpower rebuilding itself from the ground up. How Russia, or at least the Duma and Putin, viewed their status in regards to the West. So first, the question we're all asking. When it comes to this whole situation, who's to blame for this? It's Putin. 100%, this was all Putin. Even if NATO had done some bad things, even if Russia had some fair points about their expansion, even if NATO took over Ukraine like Putin says, you still can't invade others. Like, it was bad when the US did it in Iraq. It's even worse when Putin does it now.
Yep.
1991, the fall of the USSR. Russia is weak and wants assurance from the US and NATO that they wouldn't spread east of Germany. Eastern Europe could be like a neutral ground, and the United States informally agreed. Or, well, George H.W. Bush agreed. Verbally.
Bar. We can't show any weakness in front of the Russians.
This was never an actual written agreement. It was just an understanding. Oh, also I was lying. This agreement wasn't made with Russia after the fall of the USSR, but before, with Gorbachev. The importance of this agreement really depends on who you ask. For avid Russian supporters, this was a legitimate, sometimes legal agreement that NATO promised and then broke. For NATO, their promise not to move east was an informal verbal agreement that doesn't matter. Throughout the last century, there have been multiple discussions between NATO and the Russians over their relationship with NATO. The first one, at least of note, was in 1990, where the United States agreed not to move east into East Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The USSR, though weakened, was still a prominent power, and NATO verbally agreed that they would never move in to Germany. And then the Soviets collapsed. Now, when talking about how important these promises were to the Soviets, we will never really know. Even Gorbachev flip-flops on how important these assurances actually were. What's more interesting is the constant mention of the CSCE. Never heard of it? It's because it never really panned out like it was truly planned. Whether or not any of this was true or just bluster, this talk of a united umbrella was seen as a viable possibility in the early 90s, before the USSR even fell. This is what Gorbachev and the Russians heard. Russia, at least if the Soviets fell, would be joining a united Europe. And then Clinton was elected. It's 1992, baby. The Soviets are dead. Bush, despite overseeing the fall of the Soviet Union and bombing Saddam's forces back into Iraq, still promised to not raise taxes.
Read my lips.
And then he raised taxes. So he was voted out. NATO was seen as a relic of an age that no longer existed. It was an active discussion in the 90s what the fate of NATO should even be. It was a stringently anti-communist alliance that no longer had a communism to fight, and yet NATO stayed. Now, let me take out this big old button.
And since you can't see, when Cody pressed the button, it says, "This does not justify Russia's actions against their neighbors."
Mm-hmm.
I should iterate that the Russians are not simply victims in this. For Central Europe, nations like Poland, Hungary, Romania, and even other nations like the Baltic states were living under Soviet control for decades. As soon as the Warsaw Pact fell, there was a real homegrown movement to join NATO, or at least get some protection from the West in case anything happened again.
That's something that Russia won't ever recognize. Yeah, NATO is a threat to you, but likewise, you're a threat to Eastern Europe, and that's why they wanted to join NATO. You both have mutual fear of each other.
Would anything happen again? Who knows? The West didn't know, the Russians didn't know, and this was kind of the basis of Clinton sort of keeping NATO around. We're into 1993. Russia is slowly rebuilding, with a few hiccups along the way. Clinton comes to Boris Yeltsin with a proposal, a partnership for peace. All of Europe now coming together. Nobody would need to expand NATO if we all were just in this partnership together. And then Clinton drops the bombshell on Yeltsin. This whole partnership for peace was not an alternative to the expansion of NATO. It was a preparation for it.
Yeah, the partnership for peace is a process that they started in the 90s for NATO that would eventually lead to countries joining NATO. Hell, even Russia's part of it too.
To which Yeltsin replied, why? NATO was created in Cold War times. Today it's trying to find its place in Europe, not without difficulty. It's important that this search not create new divisions, but promote European unity. We believe that the plans of expanding NATO are contrary to this logic. Why sow the seeds of distrust? After all, we're no longer adversaries. We are partners. Yet the plans continued. Poland, Hungary, and Czechia soon joined NATO. Yet this wasn't the breaking point in relations. Russia still remained a part of the NATO cooperation sphere. There was an optimistic view that the kinks in this whole thing were slowly being worked out. Now, keep in mind, this whole time, NATO is entirely justified in what they're doing. They're technically not doing anything wrong. But from the Russian mindset, going from a communist superpower to a mafia state, where this man is their leader, well, they felt nothing but shame. That fear and paranoia only began to grow and became manifested when this guy came to power. But even with Putin in office and him winning the presidency through some zany means, Russia was still somewhat friendly with the US, yet that was going to change. In 2004, NATO, under Bush's push, brought in 7 new nations. Now, once again, if these nations wanted to join NATO, that's fine. But after a decade of this, Russia became paranoid that NATO was simply out to get them.
And that's a common thing in Russian policy, too. They think NATO is going to try to invade them. Regardless if it's true or not. That's how they feel since the Cold War started, and you can't just ignore that. That's why NATO should not have expanded. It should have done what the original Partnership for Peace plan of Russia thought was going to be. Like, NATO would either stay as it is or be abolished, and it would just be like a new European security system.
I would have at least... Okay, so, under my thing, NATO, as it currently stands, would not exist. But there would be like some military cooperation thing between most of the nations of Europe.
But
with Baltics, Belarus, and Ukraine as a thing between them and Russia. And probably also, maybe not Georgia, because they're a bit small, but Armenia and Azerbaijan as kind of buffer between the Caucasus.
And that's what
with Turkey.
And that's what the EU also has too, has like a collective defensive thing too.
Then Bush welcomes in these nations as escaping an evil empire.
The door to NATO will remain open until the whole of Europe is united in freedom and in peace.
You can even go back to articles in 2004 where people say Russia is going to change their foreign policy. The Russian Duma began freaking out, and the first man they ran to was a violent Putin. Georgia was invaded 4 years later.
And it doesn't help too that now I've been thinking about it the last few days, this reminds me a lot like when Germany collapsed right after World War I. Haven't you noticed that too with like Russia? Because think of it. Like, the Soviet Union was like the German Empire. Then when they collapsed, like how German Empire collapsed after World War I, they tried to become like democratic and all that, and it failed so massively, and then the Great Depression happened, because for all of you don't remember when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia's economy declined by over 50% in just a few years, and they almost defaulted in 1998. And their economy, 30 years later, has never recovered. Capitalism has just been a terrible thing for Russia right now. They should not have gone completely to capitalism as they did. They should have gone like how China did. Gradual reforms. So Russia was in a bad shape economically, and that's what led to an authoritarian like Putin getting in power just like Hitler in Germany.
Keep in mind when I say Russians, I don't mean all Russians. I mean the Russian government, which should usually be clear, but I just know some of you are going to try to use that as a gotcha. One question may be on your mind. After the Cold War, why didn't the Russians just join NATO if they were so afraid of it? General opposition to the West, for one. Russia, even while the USSR was collapsing, didn't want to view this as a defeat. They wanted to view this as a new age. Then it turns out only their institutions fell. But there's also another reason why Russia didn't join. NATO is not simply an alliance, it is a structured machine. When a nation joins NATO, it is not simply changing to the blue team. The way its military is organized becomes based around being able to work within that machine. A country joining NATO is a process that takes years. This isn't a process that simply happens. For one, a nation joining NATO has to be unanimously accepted by everyone. And it also...
Yeah, so for all of you that don't know, that was what happened with Russia, the reason what happened in 2000 when they wanted to join, but it didn't happen. Because they wanted to join immediately, whereas NATO's like, no, it's a process, and you have to, like, wait for it, basically. So, for all of you just point out, Kobe pointed out, in order to join NATO, one thing is you have to have every single member of NATO agree to it. And if one vetoes, then you can't join. Everyone has to agree to it. That's a major hurdle. Two, NATO also not only... It basically has to be, like, transparent economically, politically, militarily aligned with NATO. Like, you have to democratize. You have to become, like, capitalist, like, become under America's sway. Set your military up exactly like how NATO does, reveal like every single thing, and Russia just doesn't want to do any of that.
It has to be voted on by that nation's population. As an example, Hungary in 1997 voted 85% in favor of joining. Would the Russian people ever have accepted to join an organization that they believed was an arm of the American empire?
And for all of you that don't know, like younger Russians around like you and my age, they're actually pro-Western if you don't know that.
Yeah, I heard of that.
So, and also a lot of the anti-American NATO crap in Russia is also because of the government too. Remember that.
Yeah.
So if Russia went down the right path, gradually went to capitalism, maybe became a social democracy and pro-Western like socially, that could actually be possible that they could join NATO. But they unfortunately went down the wrong track.
The rule of geopolitics is the closer you are to a superpower, the more they mingle and try to control your nation. And that's what Russia really views a lot of their neighbors as, just pawns on a board for which they, as the stronger nation, have the right to control. Their goals in Europe simply drive others away from them. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. NATO expansion closer to Russia only made them more paranoid and isolated. However, if NATO didn't expand, who's to say what countries like Estonia might find themselves in right now? It's clear Putin has some fantasy about rebuilding the Russian Empire, or at least the influence of the USSR. This video is not about two equally bad camps. NATO's greatest sin, at least in this regard, is leaving its doors wide open. It's been said that Americans should imagine what it'd be like if Canada fell to Chinese influence. Complaining that your geopolitical rival lied about letting your former allies into their Compass Club doesn't make you look like a victim. Nobody would feel sorry for the United States if China took Canada. They would laugh. Oh wait, actually we don't need a hypothetical. The same situation happened with the US too, with Cuba. And we know how the US would react when a
Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yep, Cuban Missile Crisis.
He returns to the enemy side. Keep them sanctioned for decades, which, here's a little tip, is a bad thing to do too.
And don't even work!
It is used a lot by pro-Putin supporters, bringing up every transgression the US has ever done. And it's true the United States has done a lot of bad things. Iraq, for instance, that was bad. It's funny it's being used as an equivalent because people in the West at the time protested the war without disappearing. The closest the U.S. had to censoring opposition to the Iraq War was when the country industry killed off the Dixie Chick's career.
Although, Cody, you know that was capitalism and individual people, won the government themselves that censored them.
Can Russians today say the same thing? Or are they not even allowed to call this a war, but a military operation?
Yeah, they censor people that say it's a war in Russia, which is unbelievable.
Asking some questions to ourselves. Did NATO still need to exist after the Soviets fell? Did NATO existing push Russia towards a nationalistic paranoia in its reforming years that undermined the same liberal democracy that the West was trying to plant within the country?
Yes.
Yes.
Was NATO obligated to give Russian interests the time of day? Do geopolitics even work like that? From my personal opinion, I believe that the Russians had far different expectations for what a post-Soviet world would look like. The Russians believed, in part because of those 1990 talks involving East Germany, that with the end of the Warsaw Pact, NATO wouldn't expand. That instead there would be some coalition in Europe where Russia has special privileges. While to the Americans, they took the fall of the USSR as a victory. Their promises to the Soviets were when the Warsaw Pact still existed. With the collapse, the Americans now oversaw a Central and Eastern Europe that was eager to join in the economic prosperity of the West. It was a complicated act balancing these nations while also trying to not exclude the Russians. A Europe that Russia claimed it wanted to be in. Yet Russia only became more and more isolated. While much of this...
Basically, it boils down to this. Russia still, this day, despite the collapse of the Soviet Union, still thinks that they're a great power. And, of course, being a great power means they can control countries like how America does all around the world. But you're not a great power. Especially now that the war's happened in Ukraine, I don't even think you're just, I even double down, triple down my thought before I said before that I don't even think you're the most powerful country in Europe. You're not a great power. You need to eventually recognize that. You need to, as you said before, that you're just a big country in Europe, no different than Germany, France, UK. Yeah, that's all you are, and you need to accept that.
Discussion is around NATO. This is simply one element. NATO, up until recent events, didn't actually move their military equipment past those original 1991 borders.
And yeah, for all of you who didn't know, until a few years ago, all of NATO's equipment, even though they expanded to Eastern Europe, all their military equipment was still in Western Europe. They only started moving troops and equipment when Russia invaded Ukraine, the first time in Crimea.
The main issue the Russian government has isn't just a military bloc, but Western institutions. Or at least institutions that don't serve their interests. If Putin wasn't blaming NATO, the problem would be something else. I don't know, the whole thing that started this in the first place. Like Ukrainians wanting to join the European Union. Putin's Russia really has been their own worst enemy for a while. as every hostile action, every threat, every influence, every corrupt politician has only made their former allies turn against them. It's always good to try to see from all perspectives, yet not all perspectives are equal. Sometimes the perspective is simply that another nation was a mistake to exist. Sometimes it's that the collapse of the USSR was the most catastrophic event of the 20th century.
It most certainly was for Russia.
To the idea that NATO misled the Russians, it does not justify their actions. Should Putin really be talking about how misleading is bad? Kind of seems like that was their strategy for the last few months.
True.
NATO is not a perfect organization. However, if the nations of Europe want to join this club, it should always be their right. Russia expected the continent to remain a neutral ground for their own interests, even after their pact collapsed. And when that didn't happen, they claimed no fair. You do not start wars over verbal agreements that happened before most of your troops were even born. We cannot forget that this all is coming down to a real war within a split nation. A war that, while true, has been raging for 8 years, only began because the Russian side didn't have their guy in charge anymore. One that escalated into an invasion of an independent nation, which, regardless of the justification, only justifies the fears of Russia's enemies. So, yeah, congrats, Putin. You were the monster that proved NATO was right to build up. While this alliance didn't know what it was going to be in the mid-90s, it sure does know now. You didn't want to be a part of Europe, and now you get your wish.
Yep, and you made NATO stronger and more unified, which is the exact opposite of what you claim to be, which is more proof that this was not just about NATO. They want to control Crimea at all costs. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
So yeah, what did you say about that video Cody did? Awesome or what?
Yeah, that is pretty awesome.
So yeah, like, to me, after seeing these last few months or whatever, it boils down really to two things. The way Russia fell after the Soviet Union collapsing and NATO expansion. Neither thing should have happened.
Like I said,
Russia should have slowly converted to capitalism instead of doing it all the way at the start like China did, and slowly, with the help of the West, become a social democracy, which would have helped immensely. And maybe and just like how, because it's not just Russia, like a good chunk of Eastern Europe has never recovered financially, economically, from the collapse of the USSR. Like, only like Poland, I think, went to capitalism successfully. Everyone else, not really. Russia's up there as like one of the worst ones. Ukraine is very, very... Actually, I think Ukraine actually suffered worse than Russia. Like, their economy and shit has never recovered, too, from it. Plus, doesn't help that you've been invaded now multiple times. But,
yeah.
like, the West did not do a good job helping Russia catch up with them. And then, of course, they expanded NATO, which, regardless if it's true or not, Russia views it as a threat, and they really do think that they're going to try and invade them or do like a nuclear first strike, which is another reason why they don't want NATO to become part of Ukraine, because they're afraid that NATO would put nuclear missiles in Ukraine, and if they do, it would only be a 5-minute trip from Ukraine to Moscow with a nuclear missile. That's like very little time to like respond to it. Like, if that... Yeah, like if it... Like, if nuclear missiles go off, like, literally every second counts. And 5 minutes would be, like, too quick to, like, see if it's a false alarm or stuff like that. So you have to... That's why, even though they're not a great power or anything like that, when it comes to NATO, you have to also take Russia's concerns in regard to this. Likewise, you have to take Eastern Europe's concerns into it. But that's the problem. They have mutually... They don't trust each other. They view each other as a mutual threat, and I don't think there was a way to fix it that would satisfy anyone. And unfortunately, right now, I don't think anything's going to change until... Like, remember I said earlier about how, like, Russia's going, like, the way Germany did? Well, right now, Russia would probably be, like, invading people like World War II, and we saw historically how that went. The only thing that would fix it is Russia loses so badly that they, like Germany and Japan at the end of World War II, would have to be humbled enough to finally accept the reality. Because that's what happened with Germany and Japan. We beat them so badly in World War II, now they're pacified. But unfortunately, that's not going to really happen unless it's internal. Because we can't invade Russia. That'll start World War III. So it has to be completely internal. And even if Putin goes away or something like that, that doesn't mean whoever replaces him afterwards is going to be any better. They might do like what was it, Operation Valkyrie or whatever, to try and overthrow Hitler in 1944, maybe end the war in Ukraine instantly, but that doesn't mean it's going to get better. It's just a whole bunch of shit that we can only hope gets better. Alright, so let's see the next topic. Ooh! There we go now. So let's see.
America essentially doing their own version of Holodomor.
So, remember we talked about some episodes ago about we're going to cover Biden if he does something good or bad. Now, we covered on this show about like one of the best things he did was leaving Afghanistan. Do not listen to the mainstream media and all that. They are wrong. That was right for him to leave. That's the end of it. Now, what he's doing afterwards, however, is unacceptable. This is something that he needs to be criticized for. But guess what? No one in the mainstream media is doing that.
As I speak,
they criticize him for doing the good thing, but they stay quiet on the thing he's doing that's bad.
To you right now, people across Afghanistan, children, women, men, people young and old, are starving to death, freezing to death, clinging to bare life because of policies that were imposed when the Taliban took power after 20 years of war. These policies are expected to kill 4 times more Afghans than estimated to have died during the entire 2 decades-long conflict. Who is in charge of these policies? The United States. I co-founded one of Afghanistan's largest women's organizations and have worked for over 20 years on girls' education, women's rights, and protection of women and families from violence. We were devastated when the Taliban took over and feared for women's rights. Right now, U.S. policy is causing a crisis that could be far worse than anything the Taliban has done. The American government is causing an unprecedented famine on the innocent people of Afghanistan, which was already one of the world's poorest countries. Afghans are experiencing the single most devastating year in their recorded history. 23 million Afghans, a majority of the country's population of nearly 40 million people, are suffering from extreme levels of hunger. The World Food Program has called it hell on earth. But this is not simply a humanitarian disaster. This is not just a tragedy or a misfortune. No. What is happening in Afghanistan today is happening because of policy decisions made in Washington, D.C. In 2021, as the U.S. withdrew from its war in Afghanistan, the government that it was supporting collapsed, and the country was swept by the forces of the Taliban, the enemy the United States had been fighting for 20 years. But instead of finally leaving Afghanistan to decide its own destiny, the United States continues to wage war in Afghanistan of a different kind, economic war. United States policy is devastating the entire country and bringing further pain to tens of millions of Afghan civilians. America and its allies cut all the money they had been pumping into Afghanistan for 20 years, on which the economy had come to totally rely. 75% of the government's budget disappeared overnight. The World Bank halted funding that supported the education sector and 2/3 of the country's health centers. Then, sanctions that were placed on the Taliban were applied to the new Afghan government as it was taking power, exiling the country from the international economy. And the last part of it was the most devastating of all. The American government decided to freeze Afghanistan's central bank holdings, nearly $10 billion that belonged to the Afghan people. What happens when you confiscate the financial reserves of an impoverished country? Inflation spikes, making food unaffordable for millions. Businesses close down and banks can't function, cutting access to income for Afghan working families. Eventually, the entire financial system collapses. And that is exactly what is happening. The Afghan economy is collapsing in rapid fashion. Experts say it is one of the fastest economic contractions in recorded history. In just
Probably
a few
until
months,
Russia takes over.
one of the poorest countries in the world is facing a faster economic decline than the U.S. saw over years during the Great Depression. The United States and its allies had built an Afghan economy totally dependent on their resources and aid. And then they cut that, taking it away overnight. And on top of that, confiscated all of the country's central bank reserves. Today, the jobs that the occupation had provided are gone. Afghans with bank accounts can only access a small portion of their money. All this in the middle of a global pandemic. And while they're experiencing their worst drought in 35 years, Afghans have been plunged into a new level of desperation. In the unequivocal words of Dr. Paul Spiegel, professor of public health at Johns Hopkins, returning from a visit to Afghanistan, I can clearly state that if the United States and other Western governments do not change their Afghanistan sanction policies, more Afghans will die from sanctions than at the hands of the Taliban. Ultimately, only the US government wields the power to alleviate this crisis. The United States says that it cares about Afghanistan. America supplies more aid to Afghanistan than any other country. But these donations do not come close to offsetting the damage that US policy is causing the Afghan people by crippling their entire society. People monitoring the situation are clear that aid alone will not create a stable economy, and that Afghanistan needs to have commerce and a functioning banking system. After 43 years of conflict, Afghans deserve to rebuild their lives. They deserve post-conflict reconstruction and to build a sustainable economy that is connected to the world. Instead, we're holding them back and making them remain dependent on aid. Not only is this not right, but it is not in America's best interest. In the words of the president of the International Rescue Committee, a charity working in Afghanistan, the economy is not just in free fall, it's being strangled. We want to say loud and clear that you can't solve this problem of mass malnutrition only with a humanitarian effort. Jan Egeland, the head of the Norwegian Refugee Council, says, "It is now, paradoxically, the Western sanctions that is our main problem in saving lives in Afghanistan. This policy can be ended at any time. Officials within the Biden administration could protect millions of Afghans from starvation and death."
But they don't care. They're going to do whatever it takes to make sure the Taliban government falls, and that's why they're doing all this.
The Afghan people's hopes lie
I'm going
with
to say it
officials.
right here. Could this be argued for, put in close to a similar thing as Holodomor, with the Soviet genocide of the Ukrainians using starvation?
Or, just like also we're doing in Yemen, too.
Yep.
Like National
That one's
Security
booked by
Advisor Jake
Saudi. That's also a Saudi thing, genocide as well. That's also a genocide that the US and Saudi Arabia is doing.
Deputy
Literally,
Treasury
in that case, they're literally trying to reduce the population of Yemen to zero.
Secretary Wali Adeyemo, and of course, President Joe Biden himself. They can end this policy right now, unfreeze the central bank reserves, and allow the Afghan people to recover from decades of war. These officials understand the value of helping working families, of protecting our children, and ensuring that they are given the opportunity to survive. But we need them to see that Afghanistan's children are just as deserving of life as children in America. The best way to address this tragedy, to stop the wave of starvation and death, is to end the sanctions we have placed on the country and give back the money that we have seized. The Afghan Central Bank was designed by Americans, and the Taliban have not changed the law. As experts have pointed out, it is an independent and technocratic institution with transparent financial flows. I appeal to you to listen, to act. Let's not cause an entire nation to experience extreme harm under our watch. America's leaders can stop this, but they must act as quickly as possible. Let's end these harmful sanctions. Let's accept that the war is over.
I agree with that. The only problem is I don't think they're going to do it, especially Biden, especially since you saw all the shit he got for doing the right thing by leaving Afghanistan. Yep. And that's why I still
that's why he never will. That's why they're like, right, you pulled out of Afghanistan, the mainstream media is like, right, you saying now take a load of more and do it to the Afghanistanis as well.
I still insist this day that the reason why Biden's poll numbers are low is because of him leaving Afghanistan, because they were doing just fine and then it happened and the media beat him over the head over and over again for it to the point where it never recovered. So now if he did do this, they would shit on him again like helping the Taliban government out. Although that needs to happen, he's not going to do it. Maybe if the mainstream media gave him praise for it from the very start, maybe he wouldn't have done that. So, if anything, it's the mainstream media's fault, too.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Shit.
Biden, end the sanctions now so we don't keep genociding the Afghans for crying out loud. Unbelievable. Fucking dumbass. And that's why I said before, when he does something bad, we'll criticize him. But if he does something good, we're going to give him praise for it. And speaking of which, now we have something that might possibly be happening, maybe. Biden doing some sort of student debt relief, finally? Let's see what Mike's video is about.
1 point of good. It'll be 1 point of good.
White House Chief of Staff Ronald Klain appeared on an episode of the Pod Save America podcast, and he was asked about student debt. Now, what he said here was very interesting and uncharacteristically reasonable for the Biden administration. Take a look.
The president's going to look at what we should do on student debt before the pause expires, or he'll extend the pause. Joe Biden right now is the only president in history where no one's paid on their student loans for the entirety of his presidency. And so the question of whether or not there's some executive action student debt forgiveness when the payments resume is a decision we're going to take before the payments resume. Right now, people aren't having to pay on their loans. And so I think dealing with the executive branch question, what we should do about that, what his powers are, how much we should do on that, that's something we're going to deal with later on.
That sounded very interesting. Now, before we say anything further, temper your expectations, because there's a couple of red flags with what he's saying there that lead me to believe that this isn't going to be the full student debt cancellation that we've all been demanding for years now. But let's go through what he said here. So he says possibly before the pause expires, they're looking at extending the pause. At a minimum, I do think that it's reasonable to deduce that we will see another extension of the pause on student debt repayment, which that's good news, right? So some cause for hopium. But what I really want to know is, what's the verdict when it comes to student debt cancellation? None of us are really expecting this from Joe Biden, even if we are demanding it, but it's nice to kind of get a little bit of an update. Well, Ron Klain says, so the question of whether or not there's some executive action on student debt forgiveness when the payments resume is a decision we're going to take before the payments resume. And so I think dealing with the executive branch question, what we should do about that, what his powers are, and how much we should do on that, there's something we're going to deal with later on. So what he just gave us was a timeline. Before May 1st, which is the date that payments are currently set to resume for student loans, they will determine whether or not Biden will take executive action and how much. So there's a couple of things working in our favor. Ultimately, I'll tell you what my expectations are. They're not very high, just to kind of be clear. But we have a couple of things working in our favor. First and foremost, you just saw the White House Chief of Staff brag about how Biden is the only president in history where nobody has had to make payments on their student loans. That's something that they are saying because they know that that's good and popular. Therefore, they want to give themselves a little bit of ammunition, something to brag about going into the midterms, and they presumably want to keep this up, right? So they know, at least at the very, very minimum, that allowing people to have a little bit more room to breathe, having this break from student loans, is popular. So that's important. So if it is the case that Biden chooses to sign an executive order canceling student debt, as his Chief of Staff Ronald Klain hinted that he might possibly do, the question is how much? What's the number? I would expect no more than $10,000. Do not get your hopes up. If he cancels $50,000, that would be very, very unlikely. But I mean, this is what the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, along with a lot of lawmakers, are calling on him to do. But on the campaign trail, he said very explicitly he's not going to cancel that much. He said $10,000. Now, he said more vague things about student forgiveness on the campaign trail, so you can take from that what you want, but this is Joe Biden. So if he's going to cancel anything via executive order...
I don't think he's going to do it at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think our nation and cinema are going to stop him again because they're Republicans and they're evil.
Yep.
I wouldn't expect more than 10,000. I certainly wouldn't expect full cancellation. If he proves me wrong, I would be more than happy to say that I was wrong and he was right here. Good on him. But I just think that that's unlikely. A couple of things that are working against us here, and this is very cynical, but his approval rating is starting to rebound following the State of the Union and following his approval of the way that he's handling the Russian invasion into Ukraine. So with that in...
Yeah, I saw a poll recently that went all the way up to like 47%, which is the highest since like the summer.
Mind, he may not necessarily feel the pressure to do something with respect to student loan repayments, because if his approval rating's going up, then, you know, why bother? It's a Democrat, so of course we should always expect less than the bare minimum. But on top of that, this administration, I mean, we need to remind you who they are. As Insider reminds all of us, Biden's Department of Education continues to fight student loan borrowers who are fighting to discharge their student loans in court via bankruptcy. For example, after 35-year-old Brian Wolfson successfully proved in court his student loans proved an undue hardship, well, the Department of Education stepped in to appeal the case. Now, they subsequently withdrew their appeal following backlash once this story became public, but still it kind of gives you a sense of what they're trying to do, where their priorities lie. They also rejected a 77-year-old nurse's attempt to discharge her student debt after she served nearly 2 decades at a public hospital. Now, let me remind you that if you've dedicated your life to public service for 2 decades, your student debt is supposed to be forgiven. Public service is one avenue to loan forgiveness. This is what the Democrats have bragged about. But when it comes to what they're doing in court, or when people make these appeals to have their student debt discharged, they're fighting them. So this is who the administration is. We hear that from Ronald Klain. And it's easy to get your hopes up and feel a little bit of hopium, but let's temper our expectations and remember who we're dealing with here. We're dealing with Joe Biden. The buck stops with him. So his chief of staff can say one thing, but this is the guy ultimately who made it more difficult for all of us to discharge our student debt in the first place thanks to his bankruptcy bill. So I would not expect him to do anything. Even when it comes to $10,000, I'm not getting my hope.
$1.
So with that, would it be lovely? Yes. Would I absolutely sing his praises if he chose to sign an executive order canceling all student debt? Without question. Is he going to do that, though? Not necessarily. But here's one thing that we do have going in our favor, or working in our favor, I should say, going into the future. The negative economic impact argument is now officially moot, because nobody has made payments on their student loans for quite some time, and guess what? There's no evidence that it has negatively impacted the economy. So this fear-mongering that we heard previously about how canceling student debt would lead to some sort of an economic crisis is bullshit.
Well, we already knew it's bullshit, but you know conservatives and other idiots are going to deny it no matter what.
I mean, the evidence is right in front of us, right? So that's one really important thing that we have in the future. And I also just want you all to save that video that we just watched of Ron Klain, so that way we can throw it in Biden's face in the future, or in the Democratic Party's face in the future, because they've kind of...
What makes you think he's going to even remember who that even is?
been dangling student debt forgiveness, or some sort of forgiveness, or just easing up our pain in front of our faces for a while now. So this is all building up to something, right? Some sort of a solution. So if they don't do anything about this, then we can throw this in their face and say, well, you all keep hinting at this, and you keep telling us to vote for you, and yet nothing is being accomplished. Now, they might just say, well, look, you haven't made payments under us, so that's your relief. You're welcome. Or they might actually take it a step further and cancel at least some student debt. I don't know, but what we just saw right there was significant. That is the White House Chief of Staff explicitly, publicly, saying that we're looking at a potential executive order to cancel student debts. Not saying how much, not saying if we're even going to do it. we may just extend the pause on repayments. But still, that's significant. And it's something that you all need to keep in mind, so when the Democrats start to waver, again, throw it in their faces. I mean, whatever we can do to put pressure on him. But I will say, I've been pretty optimistic just because there's been such a sustained amount of pressure on Joe Biden from other lawmakers, progressives, and even senators like Chuck Schumer. I mean, he's the last person that you'd expect to have any progressive bone in his body whatsoever, but he's been relatively consistent here, and I previously thought that maybe he was trying to thwart off some sort of a primary challenge from a progressive opponent, but he's pretty consistent, so credit where it's due. He's exerting pressure, and even if, he doesn't really mean it, and this is all just rhetoric, that still is important. It still moves the Overton window in our direction. So, it's a positive development here to hear White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain say that, but don't get your hopes up because you're likely going to be disappointed if you do, but still something to keep in mind because that's not a small thing to see that, to hear him say, yeah, we're looking at executive action. That's pretty substantial. So take from it what you will, but I'm not going to get my hopes up for one.
So we need to do what all you leftists say if we voted for Biden, that we're going to bully him to the left. Well, time to start bullying him so he actually does student debt relief. Because it's badly needed. So we have to say about that.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts.
Alright, so hopefully we can actually pressure him to do a good thing, and if he does, we'll do a video on talk about praising him doing so. Just like we sham earlier about the Afghanistan starvation. Alright, so now let's get into the next video of someone being evil. Mitch McConnell being an evil piece of shit. This is just disgusting.
Yeah.
So I always try to avoid hyperbole when speculating about the motivations of particular lawmakers when their actions are seemingly unexplainable, but when it comes to this particular story, I don't know what other word to use than evil, because what Mitch McConnell is doing here is soulless, it's cruel, and I'm sorry, it's just plain evil. So as Jake Johnson of Common Dreams explains, federal waivers that have given U.S. schools the flexibility to offer universal free lunches throughout the pandemic are at risk of ending as Senate Republicans led by Mitch McConnell stonewall a proposed extension of the relief measures, potentially depriving millions of children of no-cost meals in the coming months. Politico reported Monday that McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, is forcefully opposing a provision to extend the federal school lunch waivers as part of an omnibus government funding package that Congress must pass by midnight Friday to avert a shutdown. The U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And that actually passed recently, so I have no idea if this was included in it. But I actually found earlier today that something really bad was included into it that passed. And you know what that was?
What?
Andy Harris finally got his way, and he actually made it illegal to get weed in D.C.
What?
Yeah.
Illegal to what?
Weed.
Oh, I missed... to pee on things in D.C.?
No, to get weed. Marijuana.
Oh, okay.
Marijuana was legal in D.C. until just now, because Andy Harris snuck that into the bill.
Of course, because he's a piece of shit who wants to go around extrajudicially murdering people who use drugs.
And he tried this back in 2014-15. He almost faced impeachment for it. So let's start impeaching him then for it. This is stupid.
Has estimated that the average school district will face a 40% cut in federal reimbursements for meals if Congress allows the waivers first approved in March 2020 and extended thereafter to lapse. The USDA's authority to extend the school meal waivers further is currently set to expire at the end of June. Research shows that the school meal waivers, in concert with other federal relief programs, have helped alleviate costs for low-income families during the pandemic and reduce hunger among poor children, a widespread problem in the United States. So for whatever reason, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is forcefully opposing an extension of a program that prevents children from skipping meals and potentially going hungry. Now, if you think that this wasn't a problem, it is a problem, and it's a problem that very much was exacerbated due to the pandemic that, believe it or not, is still going on, even if currently we're in a good position where cases and deaths are down. So looking at the 2021 report released by Feeding America, it shows specifically the way that the pandemic has made this issue worse. And in 2021, they projected that 1 in 8 people, or 42 million Americans, 13 million of which are children, may experience food insecurity. Now, we'll have to wait to see the actual data and the numbers, but this was their projection as of last year. And those at risk of food insecurity saw their situations deteriorate due to poverty and unemployment because of the pandemic specifically. And this is an issue, predictably, that affects Indigenous, Black, and Latinos disproportionately, so they will be worse off as a result of this program ending, if that is indeed what happens. And of course,
and for if it didn't see, as Mike showed, 1 in 6 Latinos, 1 in 5 Blacks, 1 in 4 Native Americans experience significant hunger every year. And I have anecdotal experiences when I used to be in school back when I was in Baltimore County. Like, for a lot of people, just so you don't know, like, poor black communities, like in Maryland, a lot of times, the only time they actually get to eat in a day is at free lunches at school. That's why, first off, school lunches should just be free regardless. Because for a lot of people, that is like their only guaranteed source of food that day. And when you're a kid, you need to eat regularly to grow up healthily, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Should be fucking obvious. Dumbasses.
As a result of this program ending, if that is indeed what happens. And of course, single-parent households are at greater risk of food insecurity because they only have a single income to go off of, as opposed to double-parent households where they have potentially 2 sources of income. So overall, the question is, why? Why would you be against this?
Because he's
I
evil.
get that Republicans don't care about the poor, they don't care if people are suffering in this country, but this is something that's really just an easy thing that members of Congress can do to alleviate suffering. And Mitch McConnell is leading Republicans to stonewall this effort.
Because he probably laughs and comes at the thought of seeing kids starve.
This is incredibly seemingly reductionist, but it's just evil. He's just doing this to be evil because he's a bad person, and maybe he's trying to use people who are food insecure as a bargaining chip. I'm not sure, but either way, this is gross. So let's get to some reactions. 2022 congressional candidate Nina Turner says this is evil.
Base
Kyle
Turner.
Kulinski writes, comic book villain shit. Totally agree there.
Base
US
Kyle.
Senate candidate from Kentucky, actually, Charles Booker writes, Mitch McConnell never needed free lunch to get a hot meal at school. He never needed food stamps to survive. Nearly half of Kentucky's children live in households below 200% of the federal poverty line. I was one of them. He doesn't see us.
By the way, Kentucky, you had a chance to get Booker in over McConnell last time around, but you didn't vote for him, so we have to deal with McConnell for at least another 6 years, for crying out loud.
And it's true that Mitch McConnell doesn't see you because he doesn't have to think about you. He never has to think about food insecurity or poverty in general because
all he
and
cares
his
about
wife
is
are
money.
Very grotesquely wealthy. Forbes estimates that him and his wife are worth anywhere between $20 to $75 million. That is insane. So part of it is ignorance and privilege. And I'm sorry, but part of it has to be just pure evil. And I love how nobody is surprised by this, right? Everybody sees this news and we react in a way that we're expressing disgust, but nobody thinks, wow, this is certainly uncharacteristic for Mitch McConnell.
Because
it's
it isn't.
Part of the course for him. We expect him to do things that are just unimaginably cruel, that normal human beings with hearts wouldn't want to do. Most people, I think, are good people, and they don't want to see people suffer in the United States where we don't have to let that happen, right? But he just doesn't care. He wants it to happen. I mean, as Kyle said, comic book villain shit. He likes being the bad guy. To him, it's some sort of a benefit, but I mean, if you are a Republican Party voter, why are you still voting for this party? Why do you support a party that has time and again proven that they are targeting children for political purposes? It's not just this year where Mitch McConnell is making children who are already food insecure more food insecure. They're also going after LGBTQ plus children in various states. In Texas, they're claiming that a family who loves their trans child who sought out gender-affirming care is child abusers, and they're going to investigate them. In Florida, they may very well pass the Don't Say Gay law. In fact, it's passed the Senate, but it's just a matter of whether or not Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, will sign that into law. So constantly, they target children, and they purport to be the family values party when they just They don't care about
They
children.
only care about certain
that time of day. So
families.
why do you keep voting for this party that is deliberately attacking families for purposes of political expediency? Why support them? Don't you feel bad yourself voting for them?
They don't care, or too stupid to even know.
They're evil as he is.
Or maybe, at best case, maybe they're just so stupid that they don't notice.
I mean, I don't like to blame voters oftentimes, but at some point you've got to ask yourself, why do you continue to support a party that is pure evil, going out of their way time and again to do things that hurts families in America? Why support this? Because of some issue, the deficit, the debt, I don't know, critical race theory, some manufactured culture war issue that you believe is more salient than feeding children? Why support this? At some point, you've got to take responsibility as a voter. This is your party, Republicans, so own it. Don't pretend to be, Christian. Don't pretend to be, the party of family values when you keep voting for shit like this.
Yep, exactly. And I could have swore I saw in this video or somewhere that Mike said, look, if you only want to vote for vote for Democrats, that's fine. I was going to be like, careful, Mike. Vosh will be very angry if you say that. So what we got to say about Mitchie boy being an evil piece of shit as always?
No surprise. He's literally one of the Sith Lords of the Republican Party. And no surprise, that's all they do is just destroy and inflict harm. It's unfortunately Sith Lords' nature to do that.
And like Mike said, everyone, stop voting for Republicans. They're pieces of shit. And now, speaking of which, time to get into another creepy piece of shit. Andrew Cuomo blames cancel culture for his downfall. Oh my god, this is just sad. I can't sexually assault women in peace anymore. Oh, the humanity. Here we go. Let's watch Kyle make fun of him.
Andrew Cuomo came out of hiding. He's been gone for about 6 months. And he is not accepting any of the stuff that went down at the end of his political career. Let me go ahead and share this Hill article with you guys, and we'll talk about it. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who resigned last year amid multiple accusations of workplace sexual misconduct, spoke out in public about his exit from office for the first time on Sunday and blamed the cancel culture mentality for his decision to leave. While delivering remarks at the God's Battalion of Prayer Church in Brooklyn, Cuomo acknowledged a difficult period in the past few months. I resigned as governor. The press roasted me. My colleagues were ridiculed. My brother was fired. It was ugly. It was the first time that I was glad that my father wasn't here so he didn't have to see it, said Cuomo. Addressing the congregation, Cuomo spoke about how politics has become so mean and so extreme, pointing a finger at his own political party. The former governor also directly addressed...
So it's mean and extreme to point out that you sexually harassed women and want you to resign for it? Okay, then.
Addressed the allegations that were made against him by multiple female staffers and said the problem was that his behavior had not changed over 40 years despite a new sensitivity among younger generations.
Yeah. Just like 40 years ago, people would be able to say, like, racial and homophobic slurs and stuff like that all the time when we realize, hey, that's not really a good thing of you to say that.
In his
Adopt
remarks, he
the
also
times.
called cancel culture a new extremism. No one ever told me I made them feel uncomfortable, and I never sensed that I caused any discomfort to anyone. I was trying to do the opposite, but I understand that was my error, Cuomo said, adding that he accepted comments that he was old-fashioned and out of touch.
So, now, cancel culture is bad in some ways we've covered before, but it's not as bad as you make it out to be. And guess what? You deserve to be canceled for what you did. And yeah, a lot of these women who did feel uncomfortable for it, you should have pointed out from the very start, regardless of how powerful Cuomo is. If it was pointed out from the very start, maybe it would have stopped. So that's also on you too, but that still doesn't mean you can just get away with what you did, you horny bastard.
So this is, again, he keeps doing a contradiction. Hey man, I'm really sorry, but also this is just a, cancel culture witch hunt. Do you have nothing to apologize, or do you have something to apologize for? It's a cancel culture witch hunt, but also I'm really sorry and I was out of touch. Now, by the way, this is his dodge. We've gone through all of the claims with a fine-tooth comb. You can go check out the original segment when we got the results of the report. This idea that, look, I'm just Italian and I'm handsy and I'm old school and this is how we did it and I didn't mean anything by it, etc., etc. For some of the claims, okay, you could say that's fair. But there were a number of claims that you can't just be like, well, that's just how we used to do it. No. I don't remember the specifics, but there were instances of straight up grabbing somebody's ass and shit, having people switched in his inner circle to get closer to a woman that he's actively pursuing and touching in ways that cross a line. So it's not like that excuse is not accurate, because he did do things that any reasonable person would say, that's not just old school, that's actually really creepy and gross and not okay. All right, now, but look, let's go a step further, because this is actually more important. He should have been out of the governorship in New York because of the decisions he made as governor.
Yeah.
Totally separate and apart from the Me Too scandal stuff.
Unfortunately, that's like the only thing that works to get people out of office, sadly. It can't ever be just their policies. They have to do something like egregious to women. That's how it works, sadly.
The guy made a decision that...
Unless you're in Japan, of course.
...sent COVID-positive patients back into nursing homes, and it led to, I don't even know how many deaths. Countless deaths. COVID-positive nursing home patients back into the nursing homes? And you think that's going to be okay? You think that's going to work out? That's not based on the science at all. He also tried to protect the nursing homes from any potential lawsuits, any liability stuff. That is being totally corrupt and owned by industry over representing the people. And the list goes on and on. I mean, the guy, one of his top allies, went down on corruption charges. One of his top staffers. He set up a commission to look into political corruption, and then the commission ended up having to look into him and his people, and then he disbanded the commission immediately as soon as they started looking into him. There was a scandal about him not using the right materials for a new bridge and trying to cover it up. I mean, that's dangerous. That could be dangerous stuff. The list goes on and on, man. And I haven't even got into, like, Chris Cuomo and CNN and their complicity. I mean, they had Andrew Cuomo on and portrayed him like an absolute hero, like a star. At the same time, this guy was making horrendous decisions that were leading to the deaths of countless people. They were fluffing him up, boosting his ego.
They were the corporate hate speech should have killed 1 million Americans.
They weren't asking real questions. They have him on to play patty cakes with him. And his brother eventually got fired because he was helping behind the scenes with the defense that Cuomo was playing over all these allegations. The head of CNN at the time, Jeff Zucker, was coaching Cuomo on how to do his daily COVID press briefings. CNN was acting as a wing for the establishment Democrats and for the Cuomos, particularly in New York.
Anything to make Trump look bad, though, remember?
So this idea of it's just cancel culture. It's not
corporate news network, and all they do is they're the ones where they've got Trump derangement syndrome.
It's not
because
cancel culture.
Literally everything they're like is like, we're going to relate this back to how much Donald Trump is a satanic, evil monster.
Yep.
You did things that were genuinely terrible, genuinely corrupt, led to the deaths of people, and this is called consequences for your actions. Now, again, they ended up bringing him down over the Me Too stuff, but it's like getting Al Capone on tax evasion. It wasn't really the main thing that should have got you kicked out of office, but you stepped down and you got kicked out, so happy days at the end when all is said and done. But, God, and so this is the classic move now. Everything is cancel culture. Whatever I don't like is cancel culture. There can never be a legitimate, genuine, sincere criticism that is fair and accurate, and there are consequences for that. No, it's all cancel culture. It's all triggered little snowflakes and the woke mob. And we're now seeing this excuse being used in the most ridiculous ways possible. I mean, we see this all the time now with the right. They'll say, what are you, triggered? Are you canceling me? It's like, no, I'm not canceling you. I'm fact-checking you because you said something that is absolutely verifiably untrue. oh, it must be the woke mob's coming after me. No, we're just saying, hey man, you're wrong, and here are the specifics as to how you're wrong. And they don't have a real response to it. So anyway,
They don't.
Andrew Cuomo, man, a new extremism. You know what extremism is? Extremism is making decisions that lead to grandma dying. That's extremism. Go ahead.
You know what else is extreme? Sexually harassing women.
Hey, COVID positive patients, get back in there.
No, not just women. Sexually harassing anyone. But we've got to be equal here. Men are also men face sexual harassment too. Ask TJ.
And by the way, if you die,
you know what? This is going to sound really bad to me, but I support people sexually harassing him right back.
The family's not going to be able to sue because I'm protecting the nursing homes. The list goes on and on. He was a charlatan, he was a con man, he was a fraud, he was found out, and now he's got no response, so all he does is, oh, it's cancel culture. By the way, there was another line.
Cope more.
God's not done with me yet. Is he going to run for office again? Is he going to run for office again? He might.
Yeah,
he might run for office again.
Yes, because he's evil and a fucking power-hungry monster.
And unfortunately, I for like New York governor, I don't think they have term limits since he ran 2010, then he got reelected in 2014, then he got reelected again in 2018. So I guess they don't have like term limits. And I'm pretty sure he was resigned. He didn't get impeached or anything. So I guess he would be eligible to run again. Although who knows if he would run in 2020 if he ran for governor again this year, because the elections are this year, so it'd probably be too soon. But who knows? Maybe he'd run for something else too. But if he does run, we have to. Unfortunately, I hate to do this because I want to stick to policies, but we got to keep bringing up his sexual assault allegations because that seems to be the only thing that works to keep people from voting for people.
Oh, man. I shudder at the thought that we have to deal with a lot of these terrible people and terrible politicians moving forward for, like, decades to come, whether it's Andrew Cuomo or Mayor Pete or whoever. I mean, this is...
I mean, he's as old as my mom, so he's not going to be around for that long.
Frauds, and it's so obvious.
Ever since Adam.
Alright, so, what do you guys say about Cuomo being a retard this time?
That's pretty wild.
I can't believe
Not right coming from him.
that was really great. I can't believe it's cancel culture to point out I'm sexually harassing women. Oh, shut up, you whiny bitch. Oh my god. And, like I said, please, can we please focus on the stuff he did too that was bad policy-wise? Like, that's really all everyone just talks about, like the sexual assault allegations. As bad as they are, they're not the only thing that he did bad. Can we talk about them too? But of course, they don't want to talk about that because mainstream media largely is okay with that.
Yeah.
Oh my god. And as like I said, I don't really want to do it, but if it's the only thing that could keep him from running, then I guess we have no choice but to bring up his sexual assault allegations every single time if he does. Like I said, don't want to. I want to focus on policies, but if we're forced to...
If we have to endlessly Me Too him, and also point out that he supports genociding old people with illness.
Yep. Alright. So we're now down to our final topic, the 2022 MLB Lockout. Now, do you know the MLB?
Yes, Major League Baseball.
So, and do you know what a lockout is?
Probably something about
locking
people out of locking either players or something out of somewhere.
It's the reverse of a strike. So you know a strike is when like players refuse to play. A lockout is when the owners refuse the players to be able to like participate in the league and all that. So the MLB for like the last few months has had a lockout. This is officially now every single league, the big four in America, the NFL, NBA, MLB, and NHL have now had a lockout of some sort. The NFL had a lockout in 2011 that cost a Hall of Fame game. The NBA had a lockout in 2011 to 12 that cost like a quarter of the season. The NHL had a lockout a few years ago, I think, that cost like a quarter of the season. Hell, they had a lockout in 2004 that cost the entire 04-05 season. Think about that. A whole season gone because of a lockout. And then they missed a bunch of games for next season, too. So, the MLB now had a lockout recently, as we were going to cover it. I was because when we are just, I posted this on here the other day to talk about. I thought the lockout was going to go on for a while. It actually was resolved literally yesterday. So the lockout's now over, and they're going to be playing soon. Now they did lose. The schedule was originally supposed to start on the 31st of March, but they canceled a bunch of games to move the schedule up to the 7th. But now that this lockout's over, they're going to move those games in somewhere so they can play all 162 games still this year. So I wanted to talk about this, even though it's over, and see what was it about and what were the terms of it. Although I found one Yahoo article to maybe read through really quickly, because I just found about this now that the lockout ended. So anyways, let's see, I'm on the Wikipedia page over it, because the players wanted, read it right here, where is it at? Oh, in a November meeting, the MLBPA, which is the Players Association, drafted a proposal for the upcoming CBA with a number of demands that would expand player control over the teams of their contract, particularly for younger players, probably trying to allow them to opt out of their contracts and all that, who are under control of the team that drafts them for the first. Oh yeah. Like the NFL has this too, where teams have the rights to your contracts for the first few years in your league before you're able to become a free agent. Of particular concern to the union was the ongoing trend of tanking, in which teams trade or release productive players and become relatively inactive in free agency in hopes that they will finish with a losing season and receive higher compensation in future MLB drafts. Remember we talked about this before when we talked about the Brian Flores lawsuit in the NFL?
Yes.
Because that is a thing that all leagues, that like the worst teams in the leagues, and all the leagues do, where they tank, they lose on, well, not necessarily on purpose, because they're also really bad at the same time, so you could maybe say they're trying, but they're still just so bad they lose. But the idea is that they lose so many games and play so bad where they'll get the higher draft pick so they can draft a really good player next year. Like the Dolphins I mentioned, 2019 obviously did this. If anyone was watching the Dolphins at the beginning of the 2019 season, when you lose 59-10 to the Ravens, 43-0 to the Patriots, 31-6 to Cowboys, and you trade all your best players away during that 3-week stretch, you're obviously tanking all that. So, the MLB does this a lot too. Now, the one difference, actually no, I know for a fact like the NBA and I think the NHL have a lottery draft where instead of it being whoever has the worst record in the league last year automatically gets the number 1 overall pick, they have a lottery, so like the 5 worst teams have a chance to get that number 1 overall pick. So I don't know if the MLB has that. But they want to stop the tanking, probably because they think it's going to hurt their financial bottom line being traded and released and all that. But there really is no way you can stop tanking. Like, teams, either they're going to have a financial, they're going to have either incentive to do it to get better players, or more likely, they just suck so bad that they're just going to lose all those games. Like, God. Do you know the Orioles?
No.
The Baltimore Orioles are my old city's MLB team. They, other than like a few years in the mid to late 90s and a stretch from 2012 to 16, they have been like one of the worst teams in MLB. Dude, in 2018 they lost like 118 games or something like that. Like there is no amount of like tanking that's going to fix it. They just suck that bad. Like a whole bunch of our teams, they just suck that badly, for crying out loud. So let's see, the other thing is, the union has argued that, we already talked about the tanking. Let's see. MLBPA Executive Director Tony Clark also voiced the desire to create a new system that would increase compensation for talented young players and so incentives like contract incentives. I would assume that MLB would probably already have that allowed in their contracts. Like in the NFL, like there's 2 things in a contract for the NFL players. They have the money, their salary. Then they also get like incentives and signing bonuses, like guaranteed money. If they do good, they'll get extra bit of money. I would assume that would already be in here for the MLB. I would find it a little weird that it would not be, especially since they make more money on average than the NFL players. Like, God, like some of the best players in the MLB get like into the $300 million figures. The NFL hasn't even gotten the 2. Oh wait, no, Mahomes in 2 years ago with the Chiefs, he got a $500 million deal, but that's one person. Most players don't even get into like the $200 million, and yet the MLB is making so much more. Now, this one I definitely disagree with the union on. They don't want a salary cap in place, if you know what that is. Oh wait, you do, because we talked about the Melbourne Storm years ago.
Yes. Also, And there are also salary caps in a couple of sports in Australia too.
Yeah, so for all of you who don't remember when we talked about this, a salary cap basically limits a team to spend a certain amount of money during the year. Like, I can't remember what it was because recently the NFL had to lower the salary cap because of COVID, but last I can remember it was like almost $200 million, which means every team in the league cannot spend more than $200 million entirety of their player contracts. Now, the MLB does technically have a salary cap, but it's not it's like it's a soft cap instead, where if you go over it, you just pay a luxury tax. Now, unlike the NFL, or in the case of the Melbourne Storm, where if you go over the cap, you would face massive penalties, financial picks, draft losses.
Yeah, but the Melbourne Storm, they rebounded fairly quickly. But about 20 years ago in the Australian Football League,
they were like one of the best. They literally had like their championship titles taken away, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
That is because in the NFL rules, they said that's a possibility. Like the worst case example, they will force you lose games or even take away titles. Although that's never happened. The worst I've ever seen was, this is really stupid, but back in 2010 they had an uncapped year because of their own lockout that it was going to happen the next year, and the Cowboys and Redskins somehow went over it. I don't know how, because like I said, it was an uncapped year, and they had to pay like the league $20 million in fines over the next few years. Like, that is a lot of money for something that doesn't make sense. So yeah, the players in the MLB don't want this because that means they don't.
I'll give you the big one. Carlton Football Club in the AFL, they breached their salary cap 20 years ago. And they still haven't recovered.
What, financial?
They have not. They're still sitting in the bottom 6 of the ladder at most years. 20 years later, they lost $930,000. They also had other investments that went wrong as well.
So you say
they lost all of their picks in the national 2020, in the 2002 and 2003 drafts. And the first and second round picks of 2003.
So basically,
before their players making payments out there.
So you're saying they just basically suck since then?
Yeah, they haven't been able to recover.
Yep, like I mentioned before, several episodes ago, like there's just some teams like no matter what they do, they just can't ever do right. Where there's many teams like in the NFL that just no matter what, they can't ever do wrong. They always succeed. Some teams just always fail no matter what. Hey, that's what happens when you violate the salary cap. So the MLB players don't want this because that means they're going to take pay cuts. But sorry guys, this is one thing, because I pretty much always support players. This is one thing that I definitely am against on. You guys need to have a salary cap. It lowers costs, increases parity, because that's the main reason why leagues want salary caps. Not only to lower costs, but also that way it will ensure other teams that are like worse off economically to have a chance to pick up better players. That will increase parity, make teams and the league more competitive, which is what they care about, because that's a big problem with like leagues when they start off. Like usually there'll be teams that are so good, everyone else is terrible, that no one wants to watch the league anymore because everyone already knows who's going to win. It's always going to be like the same 2 or 3 teams, and basically the league dies. That's happened to literally every single of the sports. MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, every single one of them when they start off. They always have like very good teams that would be like unstoppable. They would have like some of the worst teams that would eventually fold or something like that, and the leagues either die or struggle for decades before they finally recover and be successful. So that's one thing that players are just wrong on. Now the owners, they wanted a narrower ranges of each team's combined salary with a hard minimum of $100 million per year. Increased the luxury tax at $180 million. I guess how far you can go up before a salary, luxury tax kicks in. So $100 million salary cap, that's like half of what the NFL is. That seems quite low. Maybe you can bump it up a little bit more than that, but it still is near a salary cap. As negotiations continued, owners made 3 separate proposals to the Players' Union, all of which were rejected and which contained a number of concessions to player demands. These include eliminating the requirement for teams to lose a draft pick when signing a free agent with a qualifying offer. And I actually just looked up a little bit. That is still in the deal, so the players did get that. Sounds more like a compensation pick, because like in the NFL, in the draft, they have a thing called compensation picks where each team gets a random compensation picks later on the rounds depending on how many like free agents they lose and all that. So like to catch up. So like I said already about that. Oh no, they actually agreed to maybe bring in a draft lottery. No,
Oh,
no,
boy.
no, not a draft lottery. No. Oh my God. Do I need to talk about how bad it is in the NBA? Oh my God, come on. A universal designated hitter. Now, I don't know what that means because I don't follow baseball, but there's two, basically the MLB is two leagues, the American League and the National League, where it's not like in the NFL where it's the AFC and NFC, there's two conferences. They're like two separate leagues, and they each have their own different rules. I think the NL doesn't even have a designated hitter, whereas the AL does. So this would make the rules the same across the entire league, which would make sense. That's really weird why they wouldn't do that, but okay. An increase to both player minimum salary and competitive bouncing threshold, so raise the minimum salary, which I found out is indeed the case. So now, let me look at that thing again on my phone. I can't remember what it was, but it's going to go up eventually to $700,000 is the minimum contract an MLB player can get, but it's not like all in one go. It's supposed to go up a little bit over time, so I don't know how long it'll be before it goes up to it. Hey, that's good. Last I checked the NFL, it was like $350,000. So they're making double what the NFL making last I checked. All right, so let's see. All right, about that. Oh, they also the MLB wanted to expand the postseason to 14 teams, which right now it's 10, I think, which is almost half the league because the MLB only has 30 teams instead of 32 like everyone else does, and the players didn't want that, so no idea about that. That would be a massive increase, 4 extra teams too. Because a lot of fans don't really like when the playoffs get expanded because they think it weakens the playoffs, which allows worse teams to come in. But hey, that's been the case right now in the NFL largely. We have, like 2 years in a row, we've had like teams barely 500 make it in. Otherwise, they would not have made it in. So, no idea what to say about that one. So yeah, we got to see about all these things so far.
Jeez, quite the crazy situation.
Now let's see if I could find it on my phone again. Oh wait, let's read that Yahoo article since it's the only one I could find. After all that, there will be a 2022 MLB season, and while some things look differently, more on that in a minute, the most important thing will look the same. 3 outs, 30 teams, 1 trophy, 6 months, and this is the big one, all 162 games. 9 days after Commissioner Rob Manfred canceled open day, and over 3 months of negotiations, MLB and the MLB Players Association agreed to a new labor contract Thursday afternoon in New York City, assuring a full season and averting the most catastrophic consequences. Because, like I said already, they already lost several games that they're going to schedule in. And unlike the other leagues, like, remember I told you earlier about the NHL losing an entire season because of their lockout? The MLB right now, the last few years, they can't have losing games. They already got fucked over really badly back in 1994 of a player strike that cost the rest of the 1994 season and a chunk of the 1995 season. And the fans, even after 30 years, they still never recovered fan support from it. They got fucked over the worst because of COVID. Because remember in March of 2020 when COVID finally started to shut down things, the NFL was already over with. NHL and NBA were nearing the end of their season, but they had to postpone their playoffs and the rest of the season to like that summer and all that. They got fucked over badly. But the MLB, when all those lockdowns happened, were just starting their seasons. And they didn't get to start their seasons till July with a 60-game schedule or something like that with like over half their games gone. And they never recovered financially from it. So they can't afford like another lockout stuff from this crap. So yeah, that was really important that they end this one. Let's see. Our union endured the second longest work stoppage in its history to achieve significant progress in key areas that will improve not only just current players' rights and benefits, but those of generations to come, MLB executive Tony Clark said in a statement. My view is that there's only one win that gets an agreement, and we got one, Manfred said in a news conference as the lockout was lifted. Manfred, of course, is the MLB commissioner. A frantic close to the frozen free agency period and a condensed concurrent spring train will now resume because their spring train was pretty much postponed since like February. They have their like preseason stuff back like in February. They had to postpone all that. Now they gotta get that all done like really quickly before open day begins on April 7th. The 2 missed series will be made up. Like I said, canceled games are gonna be brought back. The CBA that will govern owners and players' reactions for the next 5 years represents a concerted effort by the union to close some of the loopholes by which teams have suppressed salaries in recent years. Oh, yeah, that was a big one. For a long time, the MLB has been accused of, on purpose, lowballing players, coordinating with the teams themselves to pay players as low as possible. Like in free agency, too. And they got caught doing that, too. So that really was bad on their part, too, to do that. And wrest a greater portion of the growing economic pie for themselves. The union's more radical goals targeted the reserve clause and revenue share, and eventually fell off the tables as concessions to achieve gains in the form of higher minimum salaries, a new way to compensate higher performing younger players, a draft lottery, that's bad, a policy to de-incentivize service time manipulations, and luxury tax they can live with. The most visual changes were not what bogged down the bargain for months at the time, but the baseball that returned to the fields this summer will feature a universal designated hitter and a 12-team postseason. 12? It said 14 on Wikipedia. Oh, wait. Oh, that's what they're... Okay, it was a compromise. The MLB wanted 14, but it became 12. Okay, but... So it now matches what the NFL was for a few decades. So where was the article at again? Every team will play every other team each year starting in 2023 with fewer series against divisional rivals. Ugh, they're not going to be too happy about that because that's a big moneymaker playing against divisional rivals. The new deal will also pave the way for the league to implement more changes, including a pitch clock, bigger bases, and a ban on certain defensive shifts as soon as 2023. Something Manfred called maybe most important. On the core economic issues that made up the meat of the negotiations, here's what the deal landed. All right, let's see the terms. The minimum player salary will rise from $570,500 to 2021 to $700,000 this year, and it'll go all the way up to $780,000 by the end of the deal. So by 2026 or whatever, it's going to be almost $800,000 minimum salary. Good. A $50 million bonus pool will be distributed annually to the most productive players who haven't reached an arbitration. So $50 million more money will go to players based on how productive they are. Good. A draft lottery a la the NBA, but with fewer picks involved. For the top 6 picks will be instituted. No. The draft lottery, no. God. Whoever has the worst record in the league automatically gets the number 1 pick. Deal with it, just like how the NFL does it right with the draft. Just stick with that. Teams will be eligible for a draft pick incentives if they promote top prospects for opening day. Any rookies who finish in the top 2 rookie of the year voting will be credited with a full year of service regardless of the roster. Sounds almost like a compensation pick like the NFL does, like I said, but this one I had to follow MLB more to fully understand it. The luxury tax threshold, $200 million in 2021, will start at $230 million this season and grow to $244 million at the end of the CBA. Penalties for the first threshold and sequential 2 subcharge levels remain the same as the ongoing CBA. A 4th threshold is added at $60 million above the initial threshold with higher penalties. Like I said, I don't know about the luxury tax. All I know is the teams have to pay the league if they go over the salary cap. But I don't know exactly how it is. Just have a hard salary cap, get rid of the luxury tax, and penalize the teams massively if they go over like the NFL does. I hope that the players appreciate the work that we worked very hard to address the key concerns that we've brought, Manfred said. Oh my god, this article goes on forever. Oh my god, I'm not going to read all that. But since we talked about enough.
Cool.
So yeah, what do you guys say about this?
This sounds really nuts. Really does.
So it sounds like you pretty much agree with me though when it comes to CBA. Pretty much agree with the players except with the salary cap and the draft lottery. Oh my god. All the controversy the MLB and I think the NHL have now gonna go to the MLB. Oh my god. Fucking stupid bullshit. Always remember, guys, NFL has it the best when it comes to draft selection. Oh my god, so stupid. Alright, so good luck to MLB and hope you're able to recover from this part because you need it, because you're not in a good spot financially to support yourselves anymore. Even though I actually looked up, I think they were the second highest revenued sports league in the entire world, even though all the stuff I've seen shows they're really bad shape financially. They need to really recover from that one. Alright, so anything else you need to say about this?
Yeah. Not really, honestly.
Like, how is it with, like, the AFL down there, then, like, in comparison?
Well, we don't really have those lockouts. Mostly we're just working on stuff. It's not really like...
Player strikes?
We don't really have strikes, no. We're actually pretty good with,
Do they even have a CBA?
A what?
I guess you don't know what CBA is, a collective bargaining agreement. That's what the lockout was about. Like a contract, basically, of what the players and owners agreed to, like how the league will be run, stuff like that.
Possibly. I think so.
The only thing I'm a little bit concerned about the MLB is that it's so short, like 5 years. God, the NFL's lasted 10 years. But I guess they're not gonna be able to budge. I guess they're more divisive than the NFL was, because, oh man, I remember how divisive the NFL was when their lockout happened in 2011. Oh my god, those days were insane. And just be thankful you didn't lose an entire season like the NHL did. Oh boy, because the shit that the NHL players wanted sounded very similar to what the MLB players wanted, because the NHL at the time did not have a salary cap, and the NHL wanted, and the players refused to do it, and that's what let the entire season be lost. Alright, so I think we've done enough topics for this episode. So see you guys next time, next week, with hopefully good news about the Russo-Ukraine War, and hopefully ending and all that. So see you guys next time.
See you guys next time.